Afternoon from the city of Kalamazoo, and we're here to help present an example of a land use and transportation master plan. And what's we feel like is unique about our land use and transportation master plan is that we're going kind of the extra distance to combine design expectations, street hierarchy, and implementation as well through budgeting and through the capital improvements process. So we're not just doing a land use and transportation plan in the sense that it's not going to get implemented. It's not the pie in the sky type of vision. We are actually working to link the two elements of zoning and engineering together. So in our presentation, we're going to break it down kind of into three pieces. First, we're going to talk about Imagine Kalamazoo 2025, which was our master plan update process. And then we're going to break down the plan for you a little bit. So we're going to give you some of those pieces so that you can see how we're actually working to implement both the zoning and the traffic planning aspects of this. And then we're going to show you how we're working to get it implemented.
So, can everybody hear? Kind of sharing the microphone, I just want to make sure. So imagine Kalamazoo, and I don't know how many people are from Kalamazoo and participated in this process. It was our engagement process. The last time we did a master plan in the city of Kalamazoo, we had about 400 voices, which is, probably fairly typical for a master plan. It was determined that we were going to not do that this time, that we need to do something different. We heard from our residents that we need to be more inclusive. We need to think about all options to get all people at the table. That equity plays a pretty big role in everything that we do at the city. So we were able to do a process because we did it in-house. And we engaged until we were full, until we had reached every corner that we could reach, and we were able to get 4,000 voices to help shape our master plan, and this is only 6 years later from the 400. So, we had a pretty big involvement, and what the result of that was this ended up with our master plan and our strategic vision, and these are our marching orders. This is our guide every day. This is what we need to do, and the input that we got was very clear as it related to land use and transportation issues. Everything from setting goals and priorities for us, being more friendly in terms of disabilities and movement, to being more connected. Basically, what we heard was that land use and transportation, particularly transportation issues, impact our residents' daily lives, whether it's people getting to their business, whether it's them getting to school, and that we needed to think about it in a different way. We needed to be a city of choices. Whether you wanted to drive your car, wanted to walk, wanted to bike, we need to make sure that we are providing those options for everybody. And the only way we realized through our conversations that we are going to do this is if we view land use and transportation as two pieces of the same pie. And the way to get there was to make sure that our master plan and our strategic vision reflected that. And so on the land use side, we need to make sure that any goals related to zoning looked at not just the uses of everything, but how those buildings and what we're creating relates to its surrounding and its street and helps promote the area that we want. Thinking about corridors, our nodes, which is what we call our neighborhood centers, commercial centers, and our neighborhoods as pieces, and thinking about what they need and how they relate to each other and move together, and how everything is being served.
Because if you see on the land use side, when we talk about the corridors and nodes, it's also reflected in the transportation side. So access to a place, if you can only access this by car, that's it. You've drawn the line. You've said you can access this place by car and everyone else is excluded. So being able to look at all of the different modes of transportation that people are using, many times we think about it as a land use problem. Oh, move the building up to the street, make it more walkable, make a wide sidewalk. But you've just done that on a 7-lane road that's 45, 50 miles an hour. Who's comfortable there? Who wants to stand at the bus stop there? It's those are two pieces that are not working together. And so we wanted to be sure that if we were going to zone for a walkable place and have these pieces, that the street was going to reflect that. And so the first thing that we did was we thought about this model. And if some of you may know, my former colleague and mentor, his name was Ian Lockwood. He now works for Tool Design Group. And he presented this incredible illustration, and I contacted him so I could use it. And so, once upon a time, we didn't have a lot of data about our solar system. But since then, we've got technology, we've got new telescopes, we've actually been to outer space, we've looked back at the planet, and we've learned that through all of that data, we actually have a different system of organization. However, that does not keep people, from the Flat Earth Society, from believing that that data might not be real. So while we still have 1 foot in this very auto-centric world with all of the data that has even just been presented in the last day and a half at this conference, there still remains hesitation on letting go of the car-centric and consistent planning practices that still exist.
And if we continue to do that, it's like this. It's the flip side of the coin would be, we see what we get if we only plan for cars. But if we ignore transportation and we only plan for buildings, we get this. I got some lovely buildings there, but I'm clearly missing something. We exist in this world where we've only been planning for half a place. In Kalamazoo, about 25% of our land area are our public places and our right-of-way. So if we are not taking those into account, we're really missing the boat. And there's no way that we're going to be able to create or achieve the vision that the community told us through Imagine Kalamazoo. So what do we need to do? We realize that what we wanted to make firm in our master plan and all of our marching orders as we move forward is that we plan for the human, not necessarily a driver or a car, but we plan for a human. And when we do that, we start to think about places, whether they are within a building, whether they're outside adjacent to the building. We think about all the modes that can happen. We think about our health. We think about our planet's health. And we're able to move forward in a way that is far more thoughtful. So what does this mean for our master plan and for everything that we do moving forward? So all master plans have a future land use plan, which says, here are the appropriate uses, land uses as we move forward. That wasn't enough for us. We'd end up with that picture I showed you before. So what was really important to us was to have an overlapping future land use plan as well as a framework of streets. Because again, if they don't match, if they're working against each other, we're not going to get anywhere very quickly. So in terms of the future land use plan and how we're going to use it in the city, and we're going to talk a little bit about more in this in a second, but zoning. We need to make sure that what we're saying makes sense. So if we're going to want walkable areas, want that compact mixed-use development in our commercial centers, that the buildings, we ask developers to build them in a certain way, and we reciprocate by looking at the streets to make sure that they match. Because we are setting everybody up for failure if we don't. The users of those buildings, the owners of the buildings, the business owners. So zoning as a strength, not as a barrier to what we want to do. How do we do zoning differently? Looking at buildings and their relationship between each other and the relationship to the street and what they add to a place. Understanding parking strategies and access as part of the deal, and then tying that all back to what we find in the streets.
So we started to develop a framework of street types. And we knew we were going to have some workhorse streets. We've got some great feeders that come into the streets from our regional area, and we've called those our suburban corridors. We know that these streets need to be a little faster, that they will carry more capacity as well, and that they will also be the streets that are going to be heavily used by public transit. We've got our neighborhood connectors. It begins to kind of step down in hierarchy. We're probably still going to see at least 4 lanes. We're going to see a lot more capacity on those streets, but they're going to start producing some of those neighborhood centers. Some of those business areas are going to be located along those streets. The main streets are more retail. We start to get into the pedestrian mobility on a main street. We start to see more mix of uses. We're going to see fewer public transit stops on those streets, but where they are going to be located in those nodes. And then our priority streets, these are our main commercial retail streets within the downtown. They're also highly designed, both building and streetscape. They're very comfortable to sit, walk, enjoy, sidewalk cafes. So we've begun to think about each one of these streets and what is their role in the community. And all of the streets that are not highlighted in a color are a neighborhood street, just a local street, and we'll talk about their character as well. So we put together, and when you look in our master plan, this is one long matrix sheet, but just so that I could sort of show you and you could see a little bit on the slide, I've split it up into pieces. So the first part of our matrix talks about the character of the street. And we drove these streets relentlessly for about 16 months while we were working to classify them with our engineers as well. And so we started to look at what is the character that begins to set up that land use. And then secondarily, we looked at the design. What is the design speed that we're looking for? How many lanes are we going to look at some of these roads for potential road diets in the future? Also, how will we look at our non-motorized routes? Because at the time of the last master plan, we really had 3 bicycle lane types. We had the traditional bicycle lane striped on the road. We had wide shoulders, and we had sharrows. Nobody was talking about contraflow bike lanes. Nobody even had the inkling of a protected bike lane or a buffered bike lane, a bike lane that was concealed by parking, urban trails. None of that made it into that 2010 master plan. And so now we're going to add that into this street hierarchy as well. So the first street we're going to talk about is that suburban corridor. This street is going to be the workhorse streets I was talking about. They're going to be design speeds of 30 to 45 miles an hour. This is going to be the appropriate place for bus rapid transit. If non-motorized traffic is near this street, it's going to be off. It's going to be off on a protected lane. It's going to be off on a trail. There's probably no on-street parking at all. And then I'll let Christina talk to you about the land use.
So in terms of land use for the streets, this is probably not the street where you front your single-family home or you do your little neighborhood store, because it's not that kind of traffic. It's not going to work there. So these are going to be primarily our commercial corridors. The buildings are going to be set back a little bit further than some other places, just by the nature of how they're being accessed by most of the users. There can be residential, there can be mixed use, but it just needs to be in a form that works for that area.
The neighborhood connector streets, again, you're going to have great transit, but it's probably not going to be like that local route. It's going to be the express route still. You're going to have some of those busier routes that are on this street. You're still going to want protected bike lanes because the speeds are still going to be in those upper 30s. You're not going to want to get that striped bike lane until you're down in the 25 mile an hour below. So while we're staying in those 30 to 40 mile an hour speeds, we're going to want to have the protected bike lanes.
And this makes up these are our corridors for the most part through Kalamazoo. This is a flexible mix of uses. The buildings are going to start to creep up to the street, especially as our corridors get closer to our commercial centers and our nodes, because we really see connecting those key areas within town.
Now, these next 2 streets are going to be quite similar. With the priority street and the main street, you're going to see a lot of retail. These are going to be your neighborhood nodes, and these are still going to be in that 20 to 25 mile an hour speed range.
And in terms of both of these streets, this is where we're activating the street. We're getting all users in place. We're balancing out modes. This is where we're going to start to see our buildings built all the way up to the street, making sure that we are requiring front entrances that are functional, a certain amount of transparency, minimum of 2 stories to encourage mixed use and get our density there. These are our great walkable areas, and particularly on our priority streets, we're going to start to see a requirement for ground floor commercial to make sure that they're active all the time.
I really liked how I can build off what Scott was saying in the last presentation when we talk about intersections. We talked about he specifically said, bicycle detection. And I thought that was really critical because when we think about these priority and main streets, the intersections become extremely critical. We've got lots of pedestrian movement. We've got lots of modes mixing together here. So how we stripe, have those curb extensions, how all of the modes begin to mix together within these intersections, they need to be highly designed.
And because these make up our key commercial nodes, our centers, the buildings need to match that specialness. They need to always be built up to the street. They need to treat both corners, both street entrances, and they need to be of a certain height to help define that area.
And then finally in the neighborhood street, this is where it's the traffic volumes, again, we're in the 25 and below speed design. So we want these streets to be so slow that we never need a bike lane. Bikes should always be able to travel easily on these streets. We will throw every traffic calming measure we can in a neighborhood, making sure the streets are very narrow. On-street parking is more in the more dense neighborhoods, and there won't be many bus stops except in key, again, intersections where neighborhood streets and connectors may meet together.
And our neighborhood streets, again, this is the core of our city. These are our residential streets. The street should feel like an extension almost of the yards. They should be very comfortable for everybody to move through.
And then finally, in our non-motorized routes, during our master plan investigations, what we wanted to do was be able to have a critical sidewalk assessment. We really wanted to know which routes people were using, and so what were the priorities for any sorts of missing sidewalks, sidewalk repairs, how would we take care of those, making sure people were able to get to destinations easily on sidewalks. And secondarily, there was the looking at our bicycle network. Like I mentioned before, we had 3 types to choose from: lanes, wide shoulders, and sharrows. So now we need to look at both our existing network and our future network and see how that works with our land uses. And right now we have a survey out and people helping us to look at the existing conditions of our bike network and how we can improve it.
And to further set our priorities, the master plan is a document that looks at the whole city, right? It's 10,000 feet up looking at everything. We heard from folks where they go, and they said that they walk to school, church, parks. And so we said automatically, quarter mile around all of those are our priority areas. So that works, but that's not necessarily right for every neighborhood. So we're now embarking on neighborhood plans. We're doing these on-the-ground studies to understand our bike routes and our sidewalks, because maybe they need to be stretched a little bit to the east or west to pick up that senior center, that always walks to the grocery store or the youth center. And so we're working at trying to figure out what that means in an on-the-ground way so we can be creating things that are right and not missing the mark. And I think
we've got 1 minute left, so we'll quickly go through. This is an example of an urban trail that was recently built on Kalamazoo Avenue.
And these are some of the things that we are going to be incorporating into our zoning code, especially for buildings on streets like Priority and Main, making sure we have that storefront, the right size signage, and even if it's in some of our smaller streets, again, those characteristics remain the same. What are we doing on those buildings to make sure that they are inviting walkability in those areas? Oh, look, twice.
And so just to remind you of our street users, who are our mobile street users, what are our static items, those land use pieces, and how they come together are our most vulnerable pieces. And so this is why land use and transportation can just never be separated. And then quickly I'm going to show you a before and after picture, and this was in Palm Beach, Florida, where Ian was doing a lot of work as a young traffic engineer, and this is the City Hall. And then once planners and engineers got together and created their land use and transportation plan, this became a really rich place. And this is not an illustration, it's an actual built example of what we're talking about. So thank you.
Thanks.